Hello everyone, this is Isidore, and in this part of Greenskin unit analysis I'll be discussing the different melee infantry used by the Greenskins, their strengths and their applications in the battlefield. Goblin squads consist of a large number of goblins armed with spears and shields. These guys are kind of deceptive because despite the fact that they use spears, they're not resistant to charges and they don't have any anti-large bonuses. They aren't actually better against cavalry than any other type of infantry. Their only big advantages are their large numbers, their great shield bonus, which gives them a 55% chance to avoid small arms fire coming from the front, and their low cost. As such, they make ideal meat shields for your army, especially if you want your units to avoid fire from units like Thunderers or Handgunners, who have to shoot through your front ranks in order to get through the units behind. However, while their leadership, melee defense and armor are better than those of other goblin units, they lack any advantage they can lever to actually kill enemy units in melee, which makes them unsuitable as a core unit, as they often end up losing fair fights and routing. Use them as throwaway infantry to slow down and tire out enemy units and absorb missile fire. They can't really be relied on to do anything else. Night goblins are the meaner, sneakier cousins of regular goblins. For just 100 gold more, you get a unit with inferior defensive stats to regular goblins but with superior offensive stats, while still having those same large numbers. The biggest two advantages of night goblins is the stalk ability and poison. Stalk means that they are invisible until detected, which means that they can get dangerously close before the enemy army can even spot them, which is quite powerful against artillery heavy armies. Poison, meanwhile, dramatically reduces the ability of enemy units to cause damage, which is why night goblins will often outlast regular goblins in combat, despite their worse defensive stats. Seeding your army with a few squads of night goblins is a great way to ensure the entire enemy army gets poisoned constantly, which reduces their damage dealing power against not just the night goblins, but everything else as well. Night Goblin Fanatics are identical to regular Night Goblins, but are slightly more expensive in return for getting an activatable ability that causes the squad to throw 3 Fanatics into enemy ranks, which are goblins that spin big metal balls and chains around. These cause small amounts of area of effect damage and disrupt enemy formations. They're pretty nice to get a small advantage by disrupting and damaging enemy infantry blobs, but they're on a long cooldown, you only get 3 uses per battle per Fanatic squad, and they're not very accurate when cast. You gotta remember to micro the ability if you're gonna use Fanatics. Otherwise, they aren't worth the added cost, no matter how small it may be. Orc Boyz are usually the core of most Greenskin armies. They have a great charge bonus for an infantry unit their cost, and their weapon strength is higher than a lot of other similar units, meaning they typically cause a lot of casualties on whatever they hit. Compared to goblins, they're also quite a bit meaner, having better stats in almost all categories except speed and cost. They usually go even with most other melee infantry of more or less equal cost, and are a great frontline for your army, with high health per soldier, shields and average armor. However, Orc Boyz can come across as cowardly as, while their leadership is certainly better than that of goblin units, they will struggle to stay in the fight after losing some of their numbers, and usually require the presence of a lord or hero to keep them in line when the going gets tough. Their shields are also not as effective as those used by goblins, making them somewhat less missile resistant despite their superior health and armor. Nasty Skulkers are the sneakiest backstabbers in the Orc horde. Like night goblins, they benefit from Stalk, rendering them invisible until spotted. But unlike night goblins, instead they deal armor piercing damage, which makes them ideal for dealing with dwarves. Of course, Nasty Skulkers are sneaky and would never stoop so low as to get tied up in a frontal assault. No, these are your flankers. You send them around the back of the enemy force to attack engaged enemy troops in the rear. Nasty Skulkers then usually also benefit from their special ability, Opportunist Murderer, which dramatically increases their damage and melee attack, as well as giving them poison as long as they are counted as winning combat. You can get this by, for instance, flanking and surrounding enemy infantry, or vastly outnumbering the enemy. They also have an activatable ability, Smoke Bombs, which dramatically reduces enemy movement speed in a circle around the Skulker squad, making it virtually impossible for enemy units to get away from the Skulkers. Skulkers are excellent for surprise attacks and can do a lot of damage, but all their defensive stats are really low, and their lack of shields makes them really vulnerable to ranged fire. If you use Skulkers, never put them on the front line. Try to use them to flank and don't let them get targeted by enemy ranged units, or cavalry if you can help it. The Warlord Boyz is a unit of renown of Night Goblins. Their biggest appeal, next to their cost effectiveness, is that they replace their poison attacks with armor sundering attacks. Their attacks apply a debuff that reduces enemy armor by 32 points for up to 10 seconds after the enemy squad gets attacked. It's great against armored soldiers like Empire swordsmen or dwarf warriors, but the effect is most likely not as strong against lightly armored infantry like Chaos Marauders or enemy nasty Skulkers, which may make armor sundering inferior to poison in those circumstances. Of course, you can always team these guys up with a regular squad of Night Goblins and combine the two effects for maximum carnage. Savage Orcs are a variant of normal Orc Boyz. They have less leadership, health, and far less melee defense, while also lacking armor and shields entirely. Instead, they have far more movement speed, have increases in all offensive stats, and benefit from Frenzy, which gives them even more melee attack, weapon damage, charge bonus, and makes them immune to psychology as long as their leadership remains above 50%. They're also covered in special war paint that reduces all physical damage they take by 20%. The biggest appeal of Savage Orcs is that they deal far more damage than regular Orc Boyz, and can quickly cut their way through most infantry squads that aren't very heavily armored. Their war paint also makes them a bit more durable than normal Orc Boyz against units that deal high armor piercing damage, since Orc Boy armor doesn't protect them from that. However, their own lack of armor and lack of shields makes them very vulnerable to ranged fire. Unopposed ranged attacks will always take a heavy toll on Savage Orcs. The 8-peak Loonies are a squad of renown of Night Goblin Fanatics. They benefit from being unbreakable, which means they never rout, which makes them great for holding the line dependently. However, they don't become more durable than regular Night Goblins. So, unlike regular Night Goblins, these guys won't try to retreat if faced with overwhelming odds, which may make them more or less desirable depending on what you want them to do. If you want a unit that will rout and then recover later if faced with odds that will most likely wipe out the squad, then the 8-peak Loonies might not be the best choice. But if you want a squad that can reliably stay in combat and apply poison to enemy squads, without ever having to worry about them accidentally routing because they got attacked by a monster that causes terror, then the 8-peak Loonies are a great choice. Orc Big Uns are bigger, meaner versions of Orc Boyz. They have stat upgrades almost across the board, especially on their offensive stats, which make them superb damage dealers. They hit hard on the charge for regular infantry, and can quickly cut apart most infantry units. They're also one of the few units in the Greenskins that are anti-large, so they hit cavalry and monsters a lot harder. However, while Big Uns have better armor than Boyz, they don't have shields, so they take a lot of casualties from missile fire. They also aren't charge resistant, so while they'll hit cavalry very hard, they still take the same amount of damage from the initial cavalry charge as other infantry units would. Savage Orc Big Uns have similar drawbacks and advantages over regular Big Uns as regular Orcs do over Boyz. So most of that doesn't need to be repeated. They hit harder, but take more damage. The only thing special about Savage Orc Big Uns is that the Warpaint trait works a bit better with their role in the army than it does for regular Savage Orcs. Since armor is no defense against the strike of a giant's club, but Warpaint sure is. Black Orcs are the biggest, meanest gits in the WoG. They're the only heavily armored orcs, and they carry great weapons to deal armor-piercing damage in close quarters, making them ideal as melee powerhouses. They're also immune to psychology, so they're quite hard to rout even when attacked with units that have fear and terror. However, in spite of their high health and armor, they lack shields, and their melee defense is really low for a unit of their cost. As such, while they're great at dishing out damage, especially against dwarves, they do take surprising amounts of damage from most sources. The Crimson Killerz are a unit of renown consisting of Black Orcs. In addition to counting as a Black Orc unit with full veterancy, they also have special area of effect attacks that let them cleave through hordes of infantry with incredible speed. Unfortunately, they do have far less health than regular Black Orcs, so be really careful with them. They're essentially glass cannons and you can lose them really fast if you're not paying attention, and they're not cheap. That's it for the melee infantry available to the Greenskins. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you'd like to support me in producing more content, please visit my Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next video.